When I was 2, my parents and I lived in a house that my grandparents owned. Although only 2, I apparently could speak quite a bit, as well as a few sentences. My parents' bedroom was connected to mine through the closet, meaning you could walk into their closet, go through a door in the back, and end up in the back of my closet. Then, one day, my mum started having these terrible nightmares. In her dreams, she would wake up surrounded by fire. She'd rush through the closet to my room, scoop me up, and dive out the window. Suddenly it would flash forward, and her and my dad would be sitting in a waiting room at a hospital. A doctor would come in, look somber and say, "I'm sorry, but..." And then she'd wake up at that point, sweating profusely and her heart racing. One night she woke up to me screaming. She ran into my room and pulled me into her arms, calming me down and asking me what was wrong. My response was, Mummy, my room was on fire. I was on fire." Of course, this freaked her the hell out, and I'm willing to admit that me having some sort of similar nightmare may have been caused by me overhearing a conversation about my mum's nightmares. But that's not the freaky part. Not long after this, we moved out, though not because of the nightmares my mum was having. We lived in southern Illinois at the time, and my parents were having a hard time making enough money to support us living there, so we moved up to northern Illinois. My grandparents sold the house once we moved. About 6 months after we moved out, my mum was talking to my grandma on the phone. My grandma started telling my mum about how the house we used to live in had caught fire. No one was home at the time, but the bedroom that had been mine had been completely destroyed. The fire had started because of an electrical short in the closet, the one I spoke of before. Every time I share this story, it gives me chills. My wife swore the house we lived in about 10 years ago was haunted because she's a nurse and she works 3 12-hour days per week. That left her alone in the house at least twice a week. I worked, the kids had school, and she claimed she heard doors open and close and saw things from the corner of her eye, but never really saw anything. I'm a skeptic. The house was built in '79 and is in an established subdivision. I explained it may be noises from the outside she's hearing. She had a lot of family pictures hung down below the hallway. If the bathroom door was open, the light from the window shined down the hall. The sunlight would often filter through an oak tree and make the light dance off the glass in the picture frames. The illusion of movement catches your eye, but there's nothing there. She disagreed and stood by her claim. She never felt malice or was scared, she just said that there was something there. I'm a skeptic. She isn't. We agree to disagree. One Saturday morning, we're in the master bedroom on our computers. Just her and me, and our beagle. Arkley was asleep on our bed. Our son had called earlier and said he was coming over any minute. I hear the door open and Barkley jumps up and goes to open the bedroom door, looks down the hall and barked. I heard the door close. It wasn't just the sound of the door. It was also the sound a house makes when an outside door opens and the pressure changes in it. I called out that we were in the back. Barkley jumped back up on the bed and resumed his nap. A few minutes went by and both my wife and I focused on finishing up emails or whatever. Then I realized our son was still in the front of the house. I called out and got no response, so I went down the hall to find him. He wasn't there. I checked the front door and the deadbolt was locked. The garage door was locked, as well as the patio door. While I was scratching my head, our son drove up. I asked him if he had just gotten to the house. I heard it. She heard it. The dog heard it. But there was no way any of those doors were opened, and nobody opened a door to leave. I've got nothing. Well, unless you count my wife telling me, I told you so. Then I got plenty. But I can't explain what happened at all. And that was my only experience. But my wife complained all the time. Nothing mean-spirited or evil. Just odd. This happened to me around a year and a half ago. My boyfriend at the time and I were sitting in the living room of my apartment when I heard a knock at the door. My ex asked if I was expecting anyone, and I said no. But I could just take a look, in case, to see who was out there. He stayed on the couch while I looked through the peephole. The apartment was set up in a way that didn't allow him to see me from the living room to the front room. Outside, there were two people. One young African-American man, looked about mid-20s, and a much older Asian woman who looked to be in her 60s. For whatever reason, I decided to open the door. When I opened it, the young man says, "Hi, we are a part of so-and-so religion, and we would like to talk to you about it." I have a 50-pound dog who's trying to get out, so I said, "Sure, hold on, I'll come outside because my dog's trying to get out." This was a huge mistake. I want to clarify that this was very out of character for me. However, I had recently become closer to God and just wanted to give these people a chance, as I didn't believe any harm would come by just listening to what they had to say. I was stepping outside and closing the door behind me, and was about to listen to what they had to say. They said something about how they pray to Mary instead of God because she was the one who birthed Jesus. I don't exactly remember what, but it was something like that. I thanked them for their time and then say something like, "Thanks guys, stay safe out there," and thought I'd leave it at that. The Asian woman visibly starts panicking and saying things I don't understand in another language. When I look to her partner to see what he has to say about her behavior, he says, "No problem. Perhaps you want a pamphlet though." Sure. Not wanting to be rude, and also to do some research on the religion as I'd never heard of it before. The guy then says, "Okay, great, we have them in the car. You can come with us, we're parked right out front." At that moment I start feeling weird. I lived on the third story of an apartment complex that really was not the best place and there were no cameras anywhere. Why would they just leave their pamphlets in the car if they were going to door? It wouldn't make much sense to have each person they intrigued come down to the car. And the parking spots outside my house were almost all handicapped and no one can park there. The woman grabbed my arm and started directing me to the stairs. In a split second I say, "You know what, I'm a Christian and I'm very happy with my faith, but thank you anyway." The woman, again, said something in a language I couldn't understand, and the man goes, "Are you sure? We can get it to you really fast, we're parked right there." My heart genuinely sank into my butt. I started sweating and looking for ways to remove myself from her grasp and the situation entirely. I know I must have looked panicked, and I was. What do I do? How do I get away from the immediate danger I just put myself in? I wasn't thinking and just blurted out that I was very sure, yanked my hand from the woman, who ended up scratching me from her grasp and bolted inside. I locked the door behind me and told my boyfriend what happened. That's when he looks at me, and he made a face that I've never seen him make before. He tells me about how that specific religion has been in the news for the last few weeks, because women have been going missing. And the only thing they have in common is some of the neighbors saying they had been solicited by the group the same day or around the day or time the neighbor disappeared. I read some articles to fact check what he was saying, and he was right. The police were saying that it might be in connection with a trafficking ring that was moving from neighboring cities and now was suspected to be in ours. It gets weirder somehow though. I seriously freaked out, went straight to Facebook Live and shared with my friends because I wanted to warn whoever it was that I could. I set the privacy to public after the live ended and went on with my life still a bit shaken. 1 week later, I get a Facebook message from someone who is, I'm assuming, part of that religious group, telling me I need to take the post down, and she was not nice about it. After I said I wouldn't because I wanted to educate anyone who lives in my town, she told me I was a spoiled egg and I would regret making that video. I was afraid and blocked her immediately, set the video to private and called the police. The police said they couldn't do much as I didn't have the make or model of the car they were in, and there was no proof that they had even come to my apartment or who it was. But here's the part that still freaks me out. When I went to show them the messages from Facebook, I went to unblock the lady. Her page was completely deleted. I still had the messages, but it was like talking to a little grey default profile picture. Even the name had changed to something that seemed to be the random strokes of a keyboard. I want to end this by letting you all know that I am no longer being as trustworthy as I was before. I know the things I should have done differently now, and get upset with myself as to how I acted. I'm afraid that they really are a trafficking ring, and so to all those people involved, please let's never meet again. My parents were both military. They were relocated to Austin, Texas in '92. Something was delayed and their housing was put on hold, so the people in charge placed my parents into temporary housing. To my mother's horror, it was a Sculzy, very dated double-wide tin trailer, which was mouldy, roach and rodent infested, and the windows leaked and the place couldn't hold heat. Since my dad had to travel more than an hour to and from the base, Mom was left alone for hours at night. She, one night, decided she wasn't going to wait up for my dad and turned in early. She got dressed for bed, turned on the hall light for my dad and turned out her light and laid down. Just after she closed her eyes, she let out a sigh after her head hit the pillow and all went quiet. Though suddenly she heard a shuffle sound. She was kind of confused. Dad's truck wasn't heard coming into the driveway, so he definitely wasn't home. Mum held her breath to listen, and the shuffle sound was like footsteps, with the heel lazily sliding to the floor with each step. Mum had her back to the bedroom door, and the footsteps were just wandering down the hall. It entered the bedroom. Mum propped herself on her elbows and looked over her shoulder. The light in the hall was glowing into the bedroom. Nothing was there, but the shuffle sound was right there by the bed now. Mum tried to focus on where the noise was coming from. Then, whatever it was, sat on the bed. There was nothing on the bed except for a divot on the comforter, as if someone was sitting right there in bed. Mum continued to hold her breath, calmly got up, walked over and switched on the light and shut the door behind her and fell asleep on the couch. My parents stayed in the place for just 2 months, and nothing, fortunately, ever happened again. I have another story I wish to share. I had a co-worker called John who grew up closely to the Native American culture, so John was taught about spirits. The subject of the paranormal does not faze him. When he moved into a new house, something was different about it. It didn't bother him enough to be concerned about anything, he just got on with his life. Though after his first week, John felt pretty rubbish about being there, kind of feeling like he had to look around his environment a little bit more than usual. Trying to lounge in his living room in the same evening, there was a knock at his front door. It was a firm knock, but not urgent. He got up, muted the TV, and went to answer it. When he got to the door and opened up, no one was there. There were no passing cars, it was a dead-end driveway, and he only had 2 neighbors. They were about a 3-minute walk apart. There was no one. John shut the door and went back to his chair. Just as he pressed on mute, the knock happened again. It was the same firm knock. He frowned and walked back over. But again, there was no one. He shut the door and waited this time. It's a prank, friggin' kids, he thought. But not a minute later the knock happened, and he swung the door open, and there was no one there. Just an open lawn, no trees or shrubs for hiding. He sighed, agitated but cautious, closed the door without letting go of the knob, even faster than before it knocked again. John, this time, was very agitated and really flung the door open. There definitely wasn't any time for kids to try and vanish into the darkness. John was now angry. "If you don't stop this right now, I'm gonna get you." He stepped outside his door, breathed in the fresh air and listened. Nothing. John sighed in annoyance and went back inside. Nothing ever happened again. There is one final story I wish to share. Sasha had just ended a relationship. She needed to move quickly and in a hurry. A friend of hers knew a landlord who had just opened up a double wide for rent on one of their properties, so it was perfect timing. Sasha signed the paperwork unseen, got the keys immediately and started moving in. The trailer was spacious. You walked into a large living space. The kitchen had an open counter bar and connected dining. Perfect, she thought. As soon as she started sorting boxes by assigned rooms, Sasha really looked around the home. To the left of the living room from the front door was a long hallway, one bedroom to the right, the bathroom to the left, and down the hall the master bedroom. Going to the master bedroom to set things up was the first thing Sasha noticed, when she was taken by surprise. There on the wall was something odd. It was yarn and sticks. Macrame decorations? She got closer and realized it was very primitive, a crudely wrapped dream catcher. It's a hoop, and it looked like it was about to snap. The yarn was covered in cobwebs. Weaved into the yarn were your basic plastic junk beads from a kid's craft box, and there were strands of yarn hanging and twisted together in multiple knots, with a chicken's foot. Gross, she thought, and tossed it out into the trash. Well, she didn't get to stay in her new place for the first 2 days. She had to travel a distance between her old home and stayed with her parents who had kept her dog for the transition time. But Sasha did get a chance to continue to unpack between work and her parents' house. On the third day, everything was put together enough. She collected her dog and went straight to her new home for the first full night's stay. All evening, Sasha was unpacking. By the time she stopped and looked at the time, it was 2:30 a.m., bedtime. All the lights were turned off and she settled in her room with some YouTube and her dog on the bed. At 3 a.m., Sasha noticed her dog staring out the bedroom door, ears alert, kind of tense looking. Sasha put her phone down, trying to focus on her own scenes, when she heard it. Small, evenly timed thuds. It was faint, but Sasha could hear someone walking around her living room. She lived alone. The doors and windows were locked, or at least they should have been. There's no way anyone could have broken in without making much more noise. Fear tightened in her chest. Then the footsteps stopped, and suddenly, the steps came thudding down the hallway. She sat straight up in bed, her dog barking, hackles raised, but refused to leave her side. The thud of running feet came to a stop right at her bedroom door. Sasha then heard laughter, a giggle of a small child, and then feet running again down the hallway. "Screw this," Sasha said. She got up, ran to her door, slammed it shut, slid her dresser across the entry, and the next morning she found small childlike sized handprints all over the window in the living room. It wasn't her imagination from staying up late, so it seemed. She called a friend who knew a girl who would do house cleanses with sage and prayer. It worked, because after that she never found or heard anything inexplicable again. It wasn't until I brought up the subject of voodoo religion, of how hanging a chicken's foot above your door is supposed to ward off evil. So Sasha believes that maybe the crusty or dream catcher was holding something at bay. Nothing further ever happened between the cleansing, but still, I kind of wonder about the old dream catcher, possibly warding away a spirit who couldn't rest. I would like to share with you a story that I heard based on my experience helping out at the mosque for last year's celebrations of Eid al-Adha. So I was there as a journalist working on a small island off the coast of Singapore. One of the islands have a small mosque, but they were organizing the lamb slaughtering event to give out to the poor. Many villages, consisting mainly of Muslims and Christians, receive free meat on that day, which also contributes to the next event, which is a large feast especially for the villagers. I got the chance to aid in that, and get free food as well. However, one must understand that with a lot of goats there will be a foul stench, as there will be lots of blood coming from the butchering area. By nightfall things would have been cleaned, of course. This story is told by one of the staff there that mentions a tale that will disturb me forever. There is this story that revolves around the mosque being used by an unknown cult to summon the goat woman. They would use the praying hall in the middle of the night to do some sort of satanic ritual before sacrificing a woman, most of the time a villager, to summon the goat woman. Usually they sacrificed a young girl around her 20s, a virgin, and she was stripped of all clothing before they ended it all for her. An axe is placed on the sacrificial altar and several red candles lit up before some chanting goes about. Then the spirit of a demon would enter the deceased's body and rise, placing a decapitated goat's head still fresh on hers. Blood would drip all over her body as she picks up the axe and goes after the villagers that killed all the goats. When coming after virgins, their bodies would be affixed to crucifixes and often left on the road for villagers to see. According to an old man that lived on the island, the cult consisted of satanic worshippers that suddenly came to the island and began performing their demonic rituals one day in the forest. Ever since then, there will always be strange noises coming from the forest, the sound of goats, the screaming of women, and the stomping of large creatures. Many people did go missing, but no investigations conducted were able to find them, and so cases went cold. The villagers managed to, of course, stop the demon with their exorcism and their firearms. They summoned a religious teacher to stop the demon while a priest from a nearby church also aided the villagers. However, the account varies, as some say that she escaped into the forest with her cult, coming out each night to end the life of young virgin girls. This could be the reason why most girls are given curfews, to protect them from the goat woman. I was a pretty difficult teenage girl for my parents to manage. Around the age of 15, I was at the peak of this behavior. I was drinking with my friends every weekend, sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night, exploring the world of boys, and just getting up to no good. My grandma passed away when I was young, around the age of 9. She was my only grandparent, and we shared a really special bond. She had dozens of grandchildren, but openly favored me. She was eventually diagnosed with dementia, and towards the end she would call everyone by my name, even her own children. One night, when I was 16, I snuck out of the house to visit my boyfriend. This wasn't an unusual occurrence. I did this pretty regularly, and had it down to a fine art. However, the only difference this time was that I needed to walk a few streets over and get a taxi, because he wasn't able to pick me up. I stuffed some pillows under the quilt, put my hair extensions at the top to make it look like I was still in bed if my parents ever checked on me. Then I opened the window and started walking to where I planned for a cab to meet me. It was always an anxiety-inducing experience, but for some reason I was feeling really off about that night. I soldiered on. I'd only walked a few streets away from my house when I saw my mum was calling me. I panicked and started sprinting home, apologizing profusely to my mum on the phone as I was running. When I got back to the house, my mum was waiting outside. She was so shaken and was crying a lot. I felt so horrible. She said she had a dream that my grandma, her mother, walked into her room and prompted her to wake up and check on me. Mum said she jolted awake and went straight to my bedroom to find my pillows and extensions and the window slightly ajar. This experience really pulled me in line, and my relationship with my parents is wonderful now. It always had stuck with me and my mum. I often wonder what might have happened if Mum hadn't have had that dream. I imagine things would have been very different. I would always take the shortcut through a local cemetery from my friend's house to my house. I wasn't afraid of it. I knew the caretaker and all the dogs that roamed the place. So I'm on my way back. I get into the middle of the cemetery and I can see candles lit and people standing around it. I skirt around them and they are all chanting something in Spanish. I'm able to make out a few chickens in a pen, but they're all chanting and praying. The next day I return on my bike, go to the same spot, and find little bowls filled with chicken eyes and hearts. I was only around 17 at the time, but apparently I happened upon a group of people practicing Santeria. It freaked me out at first, and when I learned a little more about it, I realized it was not much to fear. Unfortunately, I didn't learn more about it for a few years. Creepy as hell, especially seeing the remains of the chicken the very next day. This is a story of one of the scariest and strangest things that's ever happened to me. Let me go from the beginning. One morning, I got a lift to work with a lady that I work with. As we were driving, a native bird thuds into the windscreen and bounces off. We both got a fright. I wanted to stop to see if the bird was okay, but the driver insisted on driving on and that it was probably dead. I felt bad. I am an animal lover, but you know what it's like when you have to get to work and time is going to be tight for the entire day. That night I get home. I'm hanging out in my bedroom when I start hearing what sounds like a person making these groaning and crazy murmuring sounds right outside my bedroom window. I'm home alone and frozen in fear. The sound seems to move around my room to the back of the house until it disappears after about 15 minutes. I didn't look out there because I was scared, but I've lived here for over 15 years and have never heard anything like it before or since. That night I wake up from a dead sleep and hear something hiss right in my face. But the creepiness does not end there. A few days later I'm at someone's home doing some housework for them. They aren't home and I'm alone, and I go to pet their cat, who was sitting aloof on a chair by a huge window on the second-story floor that looks out over the driveway. And as I'm looking out the window, this poor little sparrow comes flying straight into the window right in front of me, knocks itself out cold, and falls quite a distance down onto the concrete driveway. I go down to the bird, which seems to be okay but just in shock. So in order to protect it from the cat, I make a nice little hospital bed for it in a shoebox with air holes and put it safely in the garage to recover for a while. I go upstairs to do the ironing. I'm in a room, standing with my back to the corner, with just the bookshelves behind me. It's very still, and it's a peaceful room with no draft, nor movement coming in from any direction. Nothing. I'm ironing a sheet and thinking back to the bird we hit on our way to work. The creepy as hell noises outside my bedroom, the hiss, and now this bird. Thinking that it's kind of creepy that this bird stuff keeps happening to me. At that very moment, I hear something slide off the bookshelf and fall to the carpet. Guess what it was? It was a heavy ornament of a bird. I stared at it for several seconds, completely perplexed. I promise you it did not just fall off the shelf, I specifically heard it slide. This thing was heavy. I went and let the bird go, which was fine. And after that, nothing else happened. This was about 5 years ago. Was the bird haunting me? It was a calm, warm summer night in July. The first year of high school was over, and me and my two friends, Marcus and Marcus, were hanging out. The night sky was dark enough to see some stars, and there was stillness in the air. It was so still, as a matter of fact, that there was a complete absence of any wind whatsoever that night. It gave off an uncanny feeling that my friends and I seemed to ignore as we roamed the town streets looking for stupid fun things to do. After messing around for a very long time, we decided to take a break in the middle of a large outdoor sports complex that we had to pass through on our walk back to Marcus's house, where we had been hanging out earlier that day. At that point, it was a little after midnight, and we decided to sit far inside the complex on the curb of the road that goes through it. This road separates many of the sports fields from the dark, dense trees and woods that border all around the large secluded complex. We all happened to have been sitting in one of the most isolated parts of the complex, with only a large post above us to see. The light from it only reached across the road and stopped instantly against the wall of the forest on the opposite side of the curb we sat on. We sat there, staring into the trees in front of us, talking for another hour about things I can't remember, and sitting in our oasis of flickering lamplight. Little did we know what could have been lurking in the desert of pitch-black darkness that encompassed us. Even with this almost sinister setting we unknowingly found ourselves in, the night still continued to maintain its tranquil absence of wind like a calm before the storm. Behind us was a large fence, a large field behind that, another fence, another large field behind that, and even more bordering trees behind that. All of it cloaked in a thick blanket of darkness, similar to the woods that loomed across the road directly in front of us. On the left side of us was that dead end of a road and some large metal crates. On our right side was down the road that led past more fences and fields, eventually leading to a parking lot and the exit. As we continued to talk through the night, still slightly amped up on caffeine from all the soda we drank earlier, I lost track of what my two friends were talking about and drifted my attention out of the conversation for a moment to check my phone. After that very moment, it was when I started to hear sounds, multiple human-like voices coming from far behind us. If I had to guess where it was coming from, based on the direction and the volume, it was probably around the forest, where it meets the furthest field far behind us, somewhere hidden in the dark. What I heard was a very eerie chanting in a language I'd never heard. Whatever it was, I could tell that multiple people were chanting it, and it was giving me serious negative energy that sent chills down my spine. I kept looking at my phone trying to tune it out and focus my attention on some memes, but it was too chilling to ignore. I then turned to look at my friends, hoping to jump back into the conversation and forget about the voices, but before I did this I suddenly realized they had already stopped talking too. When I turned silently to both look at them, I then saw that they too had also turned, looking back at me with the same spooked facial expression. My friend Marcus says, "Dude, do you hear that creepy chanting?" I reply, "Yeah, it's freaking me out." At the exact moment I said that, as if on cue, an immense gust of wind rips through the trees in front of us, spiraling in extreme commotion, tearing through the once calm air. The canopies of trees surrounding all around us were shaking and bending in the wind, with the sound of leaves rattling loud as ever, and the continuous chanting that still lingered in the distance. All three of us immediately and simultaneously stood up at the exact same time. It was as if a lightning strike of fear had jolted up us, and right as we got up, and before we could even say a word, a sudden extreme loud sound blast from within the roaring forest right in front of us. The best I can compare it to is a combination between a gong being hammered and a scream/growl and low rumble. But even that description is an understatement. This sound was otherworldly and still haunts me to this day. That was it. Me and my friends didn't know what to say to each other, nor looked at each other. We all knew we needed to get out of there, and we needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. In almost perfect synchronization, we all unanimously turned, swung ourselves over the fence, to the right of us in one jump and straight into a soccer field, where we sprinted as fast as our legs could carry us. I never ran so fast in my life. I wasn't thinking about anything but the utter shock of what had just happened. My body practically carried me across the dark void of terror that was the field. We were running in the direction of Marcus's neighborhood, just to get to the safety of his house. As we were running, the wind is still furiously blowing and I still hear the faint, distant chants cutting through the breeze. Out of the corner of my eye I see a blur of flickering candle lights in an organized formation near the tree border, in the distance behind us. We eventually had to crawl through a hole in another fence to get out of the field, and then we ran full speed all the way through some foliage to get to Marcus's house. We entered the house, slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed on the couch. To this day I am still disturbed by that night, still question what those voices were, and how the wind kicked up so quickly and furiously. The origins of that otherworldly sound and the near-perfect synchronized order of the phenomenon. My personal theory is that the chanting was a form of distant demonic ritual that conjured up some type of otherworldly portal very close to us. Who knows, though, what really was going on there that night. I'm just glad we got away. I have experienced sleep paralysis twice in my life so far. I'm turning 22 this year. My first experience happened during the summer of 2015. It was downright terrifying. It was before my senior year in high school. I had been watching horror stories on YouTube, which at the time was a very cool and popular thing. I came across a video by horror narrator Lazy Masquerade. 8 true, terrifying sleep paralysis stories. I thought to myself, sleep paralysis, what's that? I enjoyed the video and binged watched more horror stories after that. But I really like these videos and still do to this day. Less than a week later, I experienced it. I awoke at 4:30 in the morning. I was laying on my back, and when I went to move, I realized I could not. All I could do was move my eyes. That's when I see a dark figure. Tall. It looked like a man wearing a hoodie. Roughly 6'4", 250-pound man. I know that sounds cliche, but I couldn't see his face. He was looking down at me, and this experience probably lasted about 2 minutes. While I was laying there, all I was thinking of was this man could end my life at any moment. That's pretty much all I remember from that first experience. Kind of ironic how shortly after watching a video of sleep paralysis it happened to me. That was almost 5 years ago, and I recently had another experience. I had woken up a lot earlier than usual because my older sister was visiting us and had my niece and nephew over. It was 9 a.m. I visited for a little bit and caught up with family that doesn't live with us. My parents took them and my younger sister out for lunch. I didn't go because we wouldn't be back in time for me to get ready for work. So I decided to go back to sleep for 2 more hours, then go get ready. I woke up and thought I heard footsteps and a girl laughing. It wasn't my mum or any of my sisters, and I don't have a girlfriend. It didn't sound like the laugh from a girl I knew. I was laying on my back, with my head turned facing the wall next to my bed, but also facing my window and my futon. I could see my cat sitting on my futon staring at the corner of the room where my door was, and I realized I couldn't move. I tried. I was completely frozen. I could only move my eyes. I only heard the laugh 3 times, the footsteps twice, and it was all coming from the hall. My cat was staring intently at the corner. I couldn't face it. I swear I felt as if someone was in the room, which didn't make sense because even if someone was in our house, my cat would hide. She really doesn't like new people. This experience only lasted about 2 minutes. Next thing I remember, I could get up and get ready for work. I told my co-workers about it and We kind of just laughed and joked about it. My supervisor even told me a story that had happened to one of his friends, supposedly talking to Satan during a sleep paralysis experience. I told my family later that night when I got home. So yes, those are my two stories. It's weird how your mind can play scary tricks on you like that sometimes. My husband and I were passing by this big, glorious white building that resembled Greek and Roman architecture, like it was a museum. It was so beautiful and stood out against the landscape that you simply couldn't miss it. So we decided to park and check it out, looking for possible date ideas. The outside had a massive fountain that a bride and groom were taking pictures in front of. Then a robed woman, I'll call her tour guide, approached us and welcomed us to the church. The robe was a little weird for me, but I figured she may have been in a choir. We tried to leave, but the tour guide insisted on giving us a presentation. We really didn't want to listen, but were just being polite. She took us to a room with a giant Jesus statue, and everyone in the building except me and my husband and a few others were all dressed in the same robes. That's when I started getting an eerie feeling. After the presentation, the tour guide lady took us into another room, where there was a giant globe and many Bibles in different languages. We then had a discussion about spirituality and that we weren't big church people due to our schedules. She mentioned that the followers of this specific church had no issues attending because the church provided them with houses and food, and that the followers of the church were all related to the founder. Then the girl had a glow in her face and said, "You may have connections to our founder." We were very interested and have our own refined ancestry system to find your long-lost relatives. She said that to us, and that was enough red flags for me. I took my husband by the hand and said, "We need to go now." I started to thank her for her time, and we began to leave. And an older woman in a white robe invited us to stay while we were on our way out the door, and then insisted that the other girl would have the ancestry test done rather quickly. I told her we had other matters to attend to, like a doctor's appointment, and then she politely said that we were always open if we had any more questions and handed us reading material. I then pulled out Snapchat due to a notification, and our tour guide peeked over my shoulder and said, "Oh, Snapchat, I haven't seen that in the past 11 months. Come to think of it, I haven't even seen a phone." I got chills of it, and we sped out of the parking lot, never to return. When I was about 12, I lived in a house on the outskirts of Havre, Montana. It was just me and my parents, a small 2-story house with a little attic. Both me and my parents stayed on the second floor, their bedroom right next to mine, and there was a closet and bathroom up there too. There was a second bedroom on the bottom floor that we used as a storage room. All my life I have been more susceptible to seeing and sensing things, so the first day that we were at the house, I kept getting this strange feeling throughout, and this would persist the entire time we lived there. While we still had all our stuff piled around the house, we would notice that sometimes things wouldn't be where we had last left them. We would also hear noises downstairs like knocks and bumps and other things. The kind of stuff that's normal in a house. But after about a month of living there, things like doors would open and shut, and footsteps would be heard throughout the house. At night, I wouldn't be able to sleep because there would be noises in the attic. After a few months, things started turning violent. Things would fly off the counter, and doors would slam shut, and the footsteps turned into stomping. My dad got shoved down the stairs one time. There was one night that I will never forget. I kept my door open because I didn't want to be woken up if it was opened. It slammed shut at some point in the night. I don't remember what time it was, but there was a huge bang coming from every wall in the ceiling. It was so intense that pictures fell off the wall. I screamed for my parents, and it stopped, and they came running in and asked me what was wrong. I asked if they'd heard the banging. and they all said they hadn't. I was so scared and confused. I slept with my parents for a while after that. Things kept happening. A glass was thrown at my mum, and I got locked in a storage room. After a while, my parents figured something was very wrong with the house, so they sold it and we moved to where I'm living now. I still think about that house and the things that went on there, and I'm glad that I'm never going back. Back during the summer of 2017, I was a very stubborn teenager and had no car nor driving license at the time. So my way of going to my friend's house or anywhere in general was that I would always walk to my destination. Occasionally my brother would drop me off at the location I would go to. The city I live in isn't too big and is known for its gangs and drug problems. One afternoon, I put on my earbuds and wanted to get out the house to meet my friend at a local park, which was an additional 15-minute walk. My neighborhood is a gated community. There are 2 doors to enter and exit from. One leads to the main street, and the other leads to an alley behind a middle and elementary school. To make the scenery creepier, the school used to be part of a historical Japanese cemetery. There were rumors about paranormal activity and cult activity happening in the area. My mentality at the time was naive, and I brushed off these rumors. Anyone would assume it's gossip. The neighbors would say to get the neighborhood kids to go into their homes early. I take the door that would take me to the main street, and as soon as I cross at an unmarked crosswalk, I bump into a guy wearing a long red hooded robe. No, not the ones people used after taking showers or for a cover-up. It was a legit stereotypical cult robe. I made eye contact with the guy for just a second and noticed his eyes were pitch black. He had no visible pupil. My first thoughts were, damn, this guy must be high on meth. Even in the city center, everyone is always on drugs and it's pretty easy to identify what a person's on. But in his case it was the contrary. On his lower left eye he had a tattoo with a pentagram symbol. He looked like he was 25 and really tall, at least 6'1". Through my loud music I could hear his heavy breathing, and it sounded very abnormal, like some sort of strange growl. A sensation I had never heard nor experienced before. About a week had passed and I had completely forgotten about the creepy encounter, the one I had with said guy. My friend calls me one Friday afternoon and tells me to go to hang out at her house to smoke ourselves stupid and enjoy a six-pack. As my usual routine goes, I put on my earbuds and walk to the destination, which is nothing out the ordinary. I get to my friend's house, we have our sesh, get together, and after a few hours of drinking and getting high, I decide to call it a night, not being wary of the time. I realized how late it was and left her house in a hurry, roughly 11:30 p.m. I had my earbuds on as always, and I get to the beginning of the back street/alley, which is the second entrance to my neighborhood. As soon as I passed the end of elementary school, I had a bad, unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I felt like a deer trapped, knowing that there's a predator around. I always carry a sort of weapon due to terrifying predicaments I've been involved in the past. It's on the right side of my waist, and I have it ready in case anything fishy is about to go down. This weapon in particular was a pocket knife, and anyone who's ever owned one knows it makes a particular clicking sound. As I got closer to the parked cars, I stopped in the middle of the road where the last street light was lighting. I looked ahead between the cars and the second entrance, and there was a guy in a black robe crouched behind a truck. I kept walking in the middle of the road just because I'd have enough time to make a run for it. This strange guy emerges from the truck breathing heavily, and it reminded me of the encounter I had last week. He walks up close to me and we make eye contact again. This is when I notice it's the same guy. I easily identified him because of his under-eye tattoo. He stood there, staring at me like I had just ruined something for him. He saw what was in my hand. He stares at it for a few seconds and then begins walking away, breathing heavier than before. It almost sounded animalistic. I started to power walk to the entrance, In utter horror, I turn around to see another man emerging from behind another vehicle. I close the door behind me and quickly hide by the closest yard, as each yard has a brick wall separating each house. I stay there for a minute trying to process what the hell I just encountered, get on the phone and was about to call my friend in a panic, when I suddenly heard a conversation going on behind the wall I was hiding. The man went, "Why didn't you just go for it? It was an easy target." A different voice speaks up. "She had a knife. It was going to end up messy." After that I ran home, petrified. When I arrive home, my dad noticed I was frantic. I tell my dad that nothing's up and that I had seen a possum creep up on me. That's why I was scared. He believed that, and I haven't told any of my family what really occurred. It just gives me chills. Till this day, the thought of not carrying my small weapon terrifies me. God only knows what the hell those cult members were really planning on doing that night. I personally believe they were planning on trapping an innocent person to do some sinister, creepy activities. 2 months ago, my out-of-state cousin Nick and I met up in California for a music festival. Nick introduced me to a woman from his hometown, Monica. Monica was selling LSD, and I was curious, but I didn't know the first thing about buying stuff, so I got in touch with my friend Sasha, who lives a few states east and is more street smart. Sasha gave me good advice about best practices. She told me to ask about dosage, so when I turned to Monica, I asked about it. Monica told me she wasn't sure of the dosage. Actually, it was 1 drop on a sugar cube. I asked if maybe I should just eat half the cube to be safe, and she said it would be hard to tell where the drop landed, and she didn't know. So I shrugged, traded her for a pack of cheap beer, dropped acid and saw some bands, went home, and returned to my normal life. On December 16th at 5 a.m., I'm having an emotionally vivid dream where I had the following dialogue. "Sasha died today." "What? How? She wasn't sick, She overdosed." "That doesn't make sense. Sasha knows her doses. That doesn't make sense. I have to talk to Monica." As in, Sasha's older sister, Monica. "Oh God, no." And then I woke up abruptly and very upset. I couldn't shake the feeling until I eventually told Sasha about it midday. That same evening, Nick messaged me to let me know that Monica had passed away. She passed in a traffic accident at 10 a.m. that morning, about 5 hours after I had the dream. I found out because there was a news article about it. I mean, this is weird, right? Has this ever happened to anyone? I work at a movie theater in Michigan, and recently we hired a new facilities manager, which is fancy wording for a maintenance man. He's an older guy in his 50s with long white hair and always has a weird look in his eye. He's called Alex. When he first started working here, he talked to me and one of my managers who I'm pretty close with. He was very interested in making movies. My manager and I hoped to make movies one day too, so this conversation didn't seem too weird, until it did. Every day he would try and find me or my manager to talk our ears off for long periods of time about how he has made big sounds for Hollywood movies and how he has so many connections. Eventually he began telling us that he has a studio at his house and he would try and get us over separately. He added both of us on Facebook as well and went by the name Alex Crowley. If you don't know who he is, he's a satanic cult leader. I think he was the first one in the UK. He did some very dubious things in the 1940s. After stalking his page, he follows weird neo-fascist pages and is really into devil worship, so his name is very fitting. Once he added us on Facebook, he would constantly send us message after message. Some of them were audio messages of what sounded like Latin, or someone speaking backwards. I never replied to these. He would soon confront us for not responding to these messages. While he would send these, he would like and comment on my Facebook posts, even from some years ago. While he was confronting us, the conversation would come back up about going to his house. He had access to our work schedules, he knew when our days off were, and he would say, "So I see you have Wednesday off this week, what are you doing? You should come over to my studio." This happened every day. If I didn't see him up to that day off, the next time I worked he would say, "So you had that day off yesterday, why don't you come over?" He did the same thing to my manager, who's 24. He even told him to bring a swimsuit and asked what kind of beer he liked to drink. A few weeks go by, he's still pursuing us, but now he's added 2 more of my co-workers to his creep list. After the same stuff with them, one day my manager and I were working together, and he comes up saying that he put a picture of the A24 logo on his Facebook. Alex put it there because he is supposedly making a sequel to the movie It Follows 2014 with them. He started saying how I needed to go to Detroit with him to be in the movie, and my manager would be the editor of it. The next day, after he must have realized Google exists and tried to go back on what he said, Alex told us how the director was fired from A24, went AWOL, deleted his Facebook and Twitter, and only reached out to Alex because there was no one else he wanted to talk to. He told us this director would be blacklisted from Hollywood as his last movie flopped. Apparently, when your movie is bad, you're never allowed to work in the industry again. At this point, both me and my manager are exhausted from dealing with him. Can't stand working with him. I asked one of my fellow co-workers, who I knew he was talking to, if he ever weirded him out. He said of course. Alex wants to go out with this 18-year-old co-worker fencing, since that was a sport my co-worker was into. Luckily, his mum was Alex's boss, and he told her the very next day he was fired. You know, he could have just been a deranged individual, but something creepy and sinister that's too hard to eloquently put into words was going on there. I'm sure of it. So to this strange satanic maintenance man, let's never meet again, whatever your intentions were. Many people become familiar with the concept of astral travel. Supposedly, this is the ability to separate one's astral body. The only other way I can think to express it is the soul from one's body. So the soul can take spirit journeys to other realms while one's body is left safely at home. Shamans in many cultures throughout history have presumably trained themselves to take such journeys often in order to gain occult knowledge or insight about the future or about someone's health. In any case, there have also been reports of spontaneous astral travel where the event just happens to a person without their conscious control. People who suffer near-death experiences often report their souls rising up and looking down at their bodies below. I once had no opinion about astral travel. One way or another, I neither disbelieved nor believed it. I simply didn't know. Then, an experience happened to me. It started out much like any other night, except that I felt more tired than usual and had decided to retire early. I recall it was a lovely winter night, very close to the Yuletide, and a gentle snow was falling outside. I snuggled down in bed to listen to my favorite YouTube channel, preparing myself for sleep. I felt very comfortable and was drifting off when I felt an unaccustomed lifting and a sense of weightlessness. I felt as though I were floating and suspended in air, rather than sinking into the oblivion of unconscious as usual, and that my consciousness had shifted. I was hyper-alert, more even then than in a waking state. I opened my eyes, and lo and behold, I found myself floating near the ceiling, looking down at my inert body, peacefully laying in bed, fully illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I marveled at the situation. I had not sought this. I had not expected it. It was simply happening without any effort on my part. Oddly, I felt no fear, none at all. I just assumed I was dreaming. Was this what people call the lucid dream? Is so-called astral travel and so-called lucid dreaming one and the same? I had no idea. I just found myself, some part of myself, marveling at the experience. Two things I remember were the sense of weightlessness and lack of any physical discomfort. I felt buoyant and light, and rather excited by it all. I also felt a strong desire to leave, to fly. The nearby windows beckoned me, and before I knew it, I was on the other side of it. Opening it had not been necessary. I didn't feel the coldness of winter, but I was flying very swiftly through it, as if on the power of a single thought. Soon I found myself above a vast, dark ocean. The water looked very cold and unbroken, as far as my eyes could see. Soon I reached land again and found myself in a town. It wasn't any town I was familiar with. The houses seemed strange. They looked old. They were all covered in the same wooden clapboard sliding, stained deep brown and unpainted. All of these buildings were close together, attached in fact, as townhouses are. Some of the buildings had 3 or 4 floors, others were lower, but they were all attached. I don't know why, but I got the impression I might be in a Scandinavian country, although I'd never been there. The night was very dark and it seemed very cold, and snowflakes were drifting around the air. I found myself being drawn to one particular lighted window among this pile of buildings, one of the taller houses. Before I knew it, I was inside the window and inside the house. It became apparent there was a party going on. It was the Yule party. There was much light, laughter and chatting. People were moving about, sitting and standing with drinks in hand, all dressed quite nicely. I specifically remember a tall, attractive blonde man leaning against a counter that separated the wide entrance hall from the open-plan kitchen living room area where many people were. He was wearing a lovely knitted jumper, holding a drink and chatting with another man. I moved closer, only they had no cognizance of me at all. Clearly, I was not visible to them. I didn't overly marvel at this interesting situation. I more or less accepted it and moved on from room to room, exploring the house. What seemed most amazing to me was just how vivid everything seemed. I could discern every detail from my surroundings, the furnishing, the people, the activity. After making a circuit of the downstairs rooms, I came out once more into the wide entrance hall, which included a wide staircase of dark hardwood balustrade, with the same on both sides. The wood was rather scuffed and worn with age, but the whole house, although clearly older, was comfortable and had good vibes. There were 2 children on the stairs looking between the ages of 8 and 10, chatting and playing happily. I approached them with the idea of moving beyond them, and hence up the stairway to explore. But then something shocking happened. The girl looked straight at me, her eyes wide, her face filled with utter terror, and before I knew it, she screamed. This all happened so fast, I remember thinking, you can actually see me? For some reason, I was visible to this one child. In an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. It was rather like the sensation of a telescope being retracted. The entire scene before me collapsed, and then I was back in bed awake, with the voice from my laptop droning away next to me, much like I am to you now. This experience remains for me one of the most profound that I could perhaps label as paranormal, although it was very different to the ones that you usually hear about. Usually a narrator recalls an experience of seeing a ghost, often when they were a child. In this instance, albeit still alive, I was the ghost. It's perfectly natural, I suppose, for people to react with fear and shock when they see someone or something that shouldn't be there. I suspect I might feel the same. But I wonder if every encounter of this sort need to be seen as malevolent. Perhaps so many so-called ghosts are merely what I was on that particular winter night, an unexpected soul traveler who finds themselves glimpsing in places just as strange to them as they may seem to the rare and gifted person capable of detecting their presence. Since this time I have begun a course of self-training, and today I am capable of taking astral or lucid soul journeys at will. I've been to many places and met many interesting people on these journeys, and have gained much insight, but have never encountered the little girl again. My experiences thus far have shifted my former view of what I define as supernatural. Maybe someday such experiences will become perfectly natural, and maybe one day we will recognize ghosts as just fellow souls who, voluntary or not, have a go at parting some interdimensional curtain. This happened to me when it was my 19th birthday. My friends make me a party in the west part of the city, in a private place called Gran Jardín. This is in Mexico, by the way. It's a really expensive place where a lot of the people that are rich in that area live. The party ends at around 3:10 in the morning. I was leaving, and before I get into my car, I found a few things. There was a scarf on the front door, and weird stuff appeared on the front of my car. A handprint, but it wasn't normal, it was really large. It didn't even look human. After that, I get into the car and leave. When I was roughly 7 minutes from my house, I was passing the community cemetery, just like any other day, except that my car stopped in front and it just switched off. It completely stopped. It was dead. It was a Honda Civic, I think. And it could be the motor, the battery, but I really wasn't sure. I get out the car, open the door, and was looking around to see what it could be when I start hearing a strange noise coming from the cemetery. That's when I see people, in all black, wearing masks on their faces. I jump right back in my car, close it, and lock it. The people ignore me. I try turning on my car, but it doesn't move. I am absolutely terrified when I saw the door to the cemetery open, and a lot of them make 2 lines, and I'm really afraid. Are they going to target me? Imagine you're 19, stuck in front of a cemetery with random people. You're like a deer in the headlights. The men point at me. People start surrounding my car. The tallest of the bunch is in front of it. All the while, I'm desperately twisting my key in the hope that the car turns on. All the people were trying to open the doors, hitting the windows, and I was in tears. It was at that moment that my car miraculously turned on. I put the car in gear and pushed the accelerator. I was expecting to hit someone, but nothing happened. I saw the guy in front, but it was like I went through him. When I looked behind me, in my rear view mirrors, there was no one. I arrived home really scared. I don't really know what to think. I wasn't high, I wasn't drunk. This wasn't a hallucination. Those people were there, and then in a blink they weren't. What the hell was going on that night at the cemetery? I was raised to believe that ghosts aren't real. I have also never encountered anything I couldn't explain. Until now. I live with my husband and a child in a house made in 1995. We didn't know the history of anyone dying or there being any problems with the house, and we'd lived there 3 years. During that time, lots of small things have happened. We've always laughed them off or joked about them, until last night. For example, some of the smaller things include being home alone during the day. The house shook a little every now and then. Photos hanging up in the kids' playroom would fall. but there'd be no reported earthquakes, flashbangs, or construction sites near us. This one time it was 7 a.m. I called my husband, who had just left for work. I felt the walls for warm pipes, checked the gas for water leaks, and nothing. When I turned on the lights, I heard some large scamper. We don't own any pets. We do not have rats, and we have had the house inspected to make sure. Other things happen, like objects end up in places where they weren't before, especially this old cat puppet my husband's aunt found at an auction, which is creepy as it sounds, but my kids love it. All of these things alone have happened in the last 6 months of living here. Each individual thing has not caused a concern until last night at 5 a.m. when I got up to pee. I came back to bed, turned on my side to face my husband's back, and at that moment I felt something slide and push on my back. A heavy, large thing, but it didn't feel like a person. It felt like if you took a heavy pillow and pushed it hard against someone. There was no warmth, no bones, no skin. At this point I'm wide awake but can't move, completely against my own choice. I want to scream and wake my husband, but I can't. I know this isn't sleep paralysis because I literally just woke up to pee. Also, when I felt this thing on my back, my ears popped like a huge amount of pressure. We don't live in a high or low point where that happens, and I don't have a cold. So I'm stuck with this pressure against my back, trying to focus on hands to get them to move to shake my husband. It feels like forever when in reality it's been about 5 minutes. Then my ears pop again. My head hurts incredibly and I can move and I sit up straight. My husband turns over and asks what's wrong because I've started to cry. And I never cry. I start to explain that it's stupid and he wouldn't even believe me. He then asked why I was playing with his neck and his hair, and I told him that was impossible because of just what happened. He explained that he felt a warm thing playing with his neck hair for at least the last 5 minutes. We turn on the light, and his neck is red and warm. My headache dissipates after a few minutes. I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm just desperate for someone to tell me I'm not crazy, and that they've experienced something like this. I got chased by a cult once when I was a teenager, running around at 2 a.m. with my friends. But that was near Population, and I've run across ritual locations where whatever they summoned wanted an offering from me, way out in the Sierras. A bit of background. I grew up on a hill that was only about 300 feet tall, to the east of the Silicon Valley. I could see the valley looking west and a large lake looking east with no roads or anything all around to Highway 5. A rich dude purchased land for a golf course and country club, which was around a quarter of a mile from my home. It was one of the kinds with tennis courts, golfing, several pools and a hot tub. 5 yurt-type round buildings with different functions, weightlifting, aerobics and party spots. There was also an extremely tall building a bit further down past the swimming pool for wedding events and the like. We at a certain point began calling it Motel Hell. This was when I was around 5, and we went there a lot. At some point the developer decided to abandon it, the pools turned green and then dried up. We were in our early teenage years at this point, running around, toilet papering neighbors, running about in the middle of the night, thinking we were invincible, shooting flare guns, doing things that would get you thrown in jail. Sad to see how things have changed. We had seen the ritual drawings and such in various locations around the place, and learnt about some of them from the library. Sometimes we would go to the ex-party place, and there would be large drawings on the floors and the walls. We would notice that even if it was 100 degrees outside, it would still be freezing cold, to the point you'd nearly see your breath. We knew people were there at night, because our bus stop was in the parking lot, and we would spend morning breaks with many hundreds of bottles left sitting around by the older teenagers at night. Anyway, we were out running around 2 a.m. one Friday. We could see lights at the club and decided to sneak up through the golf course from the back because there were some more bushes and trees. We crept up, got in earshot and sight, and saw them performing a ritual. After a few minutes of observing them, One suddenly turned in his robes and pointed out into the darkness towards us. Not sure what he said, but they all sprinted out towards us. Not like they could catch us, but they tried for a good hour. Safe to say I tried avoiding that area from there on out. This happened just when I finished college. Me and my buddy lived way out in the sticks, a little village that no one's ever heard of, so I'm not going to bother mentioning it. There were always rumors that in the local woods, cult activity happened at night. We never bought it. It's the kind of thing that children say in middle school to scare each other and will tell each other at camp. That one time something happened, that they saw someone in a robe or something. I don't know. I never paid any heed to it. So anyway, my buddy and I are there one night, just talking and chatting, and one of us has the bright idea to go for a midnight walk. There was a beautiful path nearby that was always lit through the night, popular with cyclists during the day. It was a calm and tranquil kind of night, and we both being bored decided to light up a cigarette on our way and carry on our conversations, as neither of us were tired. It was quite late at night, already dark out, and as we started walking and chatting, an ominous and dark feeling overcame me. As you can imagine, I wasn't best pleased by this and looked around, looking for the culprit of such a sensation, but I found nothing. I decided to just be a bit more wary that night, and I didn't want to ruin the vibe. We carried on walking, and the conversations were flowing naturally. We were having a really good night. I was getting a bit tired, and knew that after our walk I would probably turn in and just pass out on his sofa. We're about halfway through this walk, when all of a sudden, he goes, "Shh, dude." I look around, don't see anything, and he puts his hand on my mouth and the other on the shoulder, and pushes me down to the ground. We slowly step back off the path, and he looks me dead in the eyes and gives me a look that says, "Stay quiet." I crouch behind a tree, really unsure what the hell's going on. That's when we see about 8 to 10 people on bikes. They're quite far away at this point, so I'm thinking it's quite silly that he's making us hide off the path for cyclists. As I said, it was illuminated. These people were all wearing robes. And I don't mean like a bathrobe. I mean they were all wearing proper dark robes. Black robes, like the robes you see characters in video games wearing. I thought this was all a joke. Maybe something he'd set up elaborately. But they all go past. And you know what? They were acting perfectly normal. They were talking and just cycling, fairly chilly. I and my friend, after a minute or so that they'd passed, get up and ask him if that was some kind of prank. It seemed all a bit too, laid back. He tells me that he thought that the rumors from school were nothing but that, rumors, but that it's clear to see that there is something fishy going on. He says that we should follow them to see what they're up to. By this point, the adrenaline that had coursed through me had perked me up a little bit, and in our stupidity we decided to see if we could follow. Deep down I thought that they must have been going quite far if they were on bikes, but entertained the idea that my friend had. It was probably about a 4-minute walk when we found the bikes discarded by the side of the path. There was a small clearing up ahead and a little dirt path that the cultists had obviously walked upon. At this point I start getting chills. What if more arrive and we're caught in the middle of some cultist fiasco or something? I really didn't want to stick around for that, but my friend said that they were already doing something and to look up ahead. It was up a small hill. I could already smell fire, and we were hiding a little bit off the path, going up the trees ever so slowly just to see what they were doing. When we reached the top, we're crouching behind trees, hidden in absolute darkness far off the path and their fire. We stare in curiosity at a bunch of people in robes dancing around the fire, and one guy right next to the fire, chanting out of a book. It was literally like a scene taken directly from a movie. Part of me wanted to believe that there was someone filming, and this could have been part of a student film, but they were all very keen in their activity. After a while, the chanting and dancing stops, and the guy in the middle starts speaking nonsense words that neither of us understand, but I would assume were probably Latin or something akin to that. At that point, my friend and I think it might be time to hightail it out of there. But just as we agree to that, do the cultists all of a sudden stop. In silence, they get into single file and start leaving, the fire dying down. The main man, as I'm going to refer to him as, says some words over the fire and proceeds after them in a straight line, almost like kids lining up at school. They each grab their bike and start cycling away, like nothing had ever happened. We're left, confused and dazed. We give it about half hour before we even make a move, just in case they stuck around. But when we were confident that they had finally left, do we go up to the embers of the fire and see if there's anything suspicious. And with that, we go home and call it a night. Nothing innately creepy or sinister happened, but I wonder what the hell they were doing and practicing, and more importantly, what would have happened to us, and if we'd have found ourselves on the same fire, had they identified us, watching their little gathering. Who knows? I'm here to share my story about an entity known as the Hat Man. I'd never known this was something other people have experienced. It almost scares me more that other people have experienced this. But anyway, here it goes. My first experience was in my grandfather's house. I had a slew of weird experiences in this house. Always kind of credited those experiences to my great-grandfather, a butcher and vice president of the local butchers' union. The basement had clearly been designed for slaughtering pigs. A massive sink, floor drains, the works. I'd felt things watching me. I'd slept-walked and often woken up, standing in the corner of the basement. Really weird stuff. The worst experience, and I'm getting chills just sharing this, was waking up and looking into the hallway to see a pair of eyes staring back at me. I couldn't move, but I don't think I was asleep at this point. Before I knew it, something was on top of me, pressing into the couch, and it felt like something was sucking the breath out my body, and just as quickly as it had started, it went away. The second is recent. My grandfather passed away. I've had countless dreams about him, nothing specific, but this is the one that sticks with me. In this dream, we were in my house, sitting in the kitchen, just talking. Not about anything in particular, but just talking like we used to do. In the dream, I told him I needed to take a shower and get ready for work, and so I did. I had left the door open as I usually do, and during my shower I look into the hallway to see this black mass crawling down it. It stands. Its shape is human but long. Its fingers come to points and are hanging below its knees. It says, "You don't belong here," and I wake up. I've been thinking about why something like this would appear. The first experience sounds more like sleep paralysis, but the second, I'm not so sure. I feel like it might be something that comes to you when your dreams tread into the realms of the afterlife.